Hello, I'm Chris Scher, Member Communications Director of the Society of Broadcast Engineers, and welcome to the SBE WEBxtra, the SBE chapter of the web. This is a monthly SBE meeting usually held on the third Monday of the month. The SBE is the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals with nearly 4,000 members, mostly in the U.S., but also around the world. Today's topic of conversation is the Emergency Alert System. Since its introduction, the system has undergone many updates, some for regulatory reasons, some on its own as its use continues, and some because of changing broadcast technology. The conversation today brings two SBE board members together with an industry expert on EAS and emergency alerting. They'll cover the current state of EAS and look at its future from many points of view. But before we get into that, I have your SBE member update for January 20, 2025. The next chapter exam window is in February, and while the application date for those exams is now closed, you hopefully already submitted your application. There will be an exam opportunity at the 2025 NAB show in April. Apply to take an exam there by February 21. You can also arrange to take an SBE certification exam at any time via private proctoring. More information on SBE certification is online at sbe.org/certification. New webinars by SBE are being created for the new year. On January 30, Wayne Pacina presents a practical approach to broadcast facility cybersecurity. And on February 13, we present Maintaining Audio Quality for Streaming Audio and Podcasting. This webinar discusses techniques for audio quality assessment in streaming networks and interfacing streams to live and recorded content. John Keane of Capital Airspace Group is the instructor. You can always watch all the past webinars by SBE on demand as well. Go to sbe.org/webinars. SBE dues renewal is also about to begin. Be sure to renew your SBE membership before April 1 so you don't lose any of your member benefits. And that's your SBE member update for January 20, 2025. Our guests today are Ched Keiler, the chair of the SBE Government Relations Committee, Brad Humphries, the chair of the SBE EAS Committee, and Ed Czarnecki, Vice President, Global and Government Affairs for Digital Alert Systems. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. I'm Brad Humphries, the chairman of the EAS Committee for the National Board for SBE.
And Ched?
Yeah, my name is Ched Keiler. I'm one of your elected board of directors, and I'm chair of the SBE GRC, the Government Relations Committee, and we work heavily and are heavily involved in EAS issues and have a strong issue there with SBE and the educational program.
Great. And with us today, we have our guest, Ed Czarnecki with Digital Alert Systems. Ed, good to see you again. Haven't seen you in a little while. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background? Tell us about your involvement in EAS, and we'll get into what we're here to talk about today after that.
Sure. Absolutely. My name is Ed Czarnecki. As Trent said, I'm with Digital Alert Systems. We've been in the EAS industry for the last 2 decades. Company is celebrating its 70th anniversary this year. I manage the company's government programs, government outreach, as well as international programs for the company. And standards bodies. I was just elected to the ATSC Board of Directors, the Advanced Television Standards Committee, which turns out to be a lot more work than I thought it would be. First meeting was just a couple of weeks ago for me. So we'll weave that conversation to this. I'm also on among other government committees, the FEMA's advisory working group on EAS, and also Canada's technical alert technical warning group working group, ATWG, for that country. So that's a bit of my background. Really kind of laser focused on public warning and emergency information right now.
Very good. Very good. So I know we've got several points we wanted to talk about today, and I'm going to turn it over to Brad and Ched. They're going to kind of lead the conversation here. So Brad and Ched, I'll let you take it away.
Go ahead, Ched.
Well, Ed, there's been a lot of EAS talk in the industry lately. I was wondering where you think the EAS industry is, where it came from, and give us a brief look into the future.
It's a softball question.
I thought I covered it all in the first question.
There we go. For the next hour, one question in 32 parts. The emergency alert system, where do I even start? It is still here. It is still a mainstay of the nation's public warning infrastructure. FEMA and the FCC have made that clear. The industry itself is in a bit of flux, as most of us know. One of the key manufacturers has decided to no longer manufacture devices. At the same time, there are 3 other manufacturers in the market, one of which has expanded its manufacturing capabilities and is rolling out a suite of additional services and products for not just EAS, but emergency information in general. FEMA, now I'm not going to speak for FEMA or ATSC, but I'll put a cap on if I do have to put on the one of the ATSC hat. FEMA certainly is looking at what's next for EAS. They are very serious about reinvigorating the focus on broadcast television and radio. It has been the national dialogue has been very focused on wireless emergency alerts. In fact, if you look at all the news reports in California, it's all about WEA this, WEA that, mobile phones getting messages or not getting messages. And then there was that oopsie that happened with a repeated message going to mobile phones at 3 a.m. But very little conversation about EAS. And in the post event scenario, we'll have to take a look at how EAS was used or not used. FCC likewise is still looking at EAS. They published their multilingual alerting rules for WEA for mobile phones, requiring over the next 30 months the cell phone system to update its capabilities to generate alerts in 15 different languages. They've got the same thinking for the emergency alert system as well. So a lot coming up. I guess we'll just use that to tee off into the rest of the discussion. But for our part at Digital Alert Systems, we are evaluating every different direction this could take, and there are a lot of them, and trying to position ourselves for the future. We're in this for the long haul.
So, there's been this talk about something called EAS at the edge, and I think that maybe this is some people's view of the future of EAS. Can you tell us what EAS at the edge is, and give us some thoughts on that and how the government plays into all that and so on and so forth?
That's one particular area we're looking at, and that relates to how we are trying to address AOIP, EAS 67, and on the one hand, and also the move towards virtualized architectures in broadcast radio operations. What we've rolled out in partnership with Telos Alliance and Nautel is an architecture using modest software upgrades on our device to handle all the audio traffic in IP format, married with or coupled with a signaling protocol that addresses really a lot of the challenges faced by broadcasters when they're looking to either go to an AOIP environment, AS 67 environment, or a radio broadcaster is, or in general, when they're looking at virtualization, how do we address virtualization without having to worry about bringing the IP audio back to baseband for the old EAS legacy device and then digital again for transmission? We're skipping that step where we've integrated full digital across the board. I'd note that what we've done is nothing new. Quite honestly, we announced the EAS Edge a couple of at the last NAB with Telos and Nautel, but we've been doing this type of support for virtualization for over a decade in the television and in the cable TV and IPTV markets with video, IP video, IP audio, EASnet, the signaling protocol. This was simply adding AES 67 to our stack of inputs and outputs for support of broadcast radio.
So does that mean that EAS at the edge is really a virtualized platform in the cloud, or is that two separate items?
That's a separate item. I don't think anybody's seriously looking at actually putting EAS in the cloud. That's an awfully dangerous proposition, and nobody's credibly looking at that because that puts EAS, or this critical function of public warning, fully at the mercy of the availability of the internet. What we are talking about is, and I think we have a slide we could show on this, is supporting the rest of the station operations, which may be virtualized, with IP inputs and outputs from our system, the DASDEC, are routed over the internal station's network through the system. Again, using EAS 67 live wire interface and EASnet. This is what we rolled out with Nautel. One of the things that we're showing, we have a slide on this on adding data, adding value with metadata. If you imagine all these workflow areas, from the live wire device to PPM, audio processor, RDS encoding, all of that is virtualized. All of that will be in a stack of virtual server stack within the station. In our case, the DASDEC remains a separate unit, which feeds the AES audio with the live wire routing to instruct the rest of the system when to interrupt, when to release. The protocols allow us to signal disable control of the PP encoding and RDS text output, and on and on. Again, imagine those four boxes those four workflows in one server stack. The DASDEC is a 2-rec unit device, and the FM HD modulator is a third. So your station is now down to essentially three units. And that, if we look at the design simplification with the DASDEC and the TELUS Alliance, that's kind of that is the system we've architected with them, where the Omni 9 system is handling the live wire, PPM encoding, audio processing, and the RDS encoding. The FM HD modulation is separate, as is the DASDEC. So again, a very elegant 3-unit footprint for the station. But when we turn to working with Nautel, the design simplification becomes even more elegant, where we've reduced the station footprint to essentially a 2-unit architecture, where the DASDEC is signaling with the Nautel GV2, and the entire station is brought down to the DASDEC and the GV2 transmitter. That's it. That's the live wire, the encoding, the audio processing, RDS encoding, all that is operating within the VM space within the server, within the Nautel or TELUS server. The DASDEC to maintain FCC compliance, and that's one of the big requirements here. The DASDEC remains separate for FCC compliance purposes, for FEMA IPOS conformance purposes, as well as for cybersecurity reasons.
So when you say the DASDEC is separate, does that mean it's on a separate hardware platform? It's something similar to what we would see today in a conventional station?
Well, yeah, it is the DASDEC as it is today. All we've modified is adding the AES 67 live wire interface out, which is a simple add-on for us, and then managing the system through the EASnet protocol, again, all IP.
So the advantage to a radio station would be that their audio transport stream would be all IP, essentially, and could be, I guess, either located virtually in the cloud or at the station?
Well, preferably located at the station. Again, one of the key points with EAS, it needs to be survivable. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to backhaul your EAS through the cloud. Even those who are looking at central casting, and we're working with several right now, both in TV and the radio market, even from the central casting perspective, not just from a regulatory perspective, but from a best practice perspective, you also have an EAS unit at the transmitter site or at the studio site. Why? Because if that central cast system is disrupted, and we're looking at scenarios like national emergencies or regional emergencies, if you lose the feed to the central cast for whatever reason, even the unimaginable reasons, the local station can still do its emergency alert role with the equipment that's still there.
So really, it's just people are doing that. The program audio or their program is cloud-based, but this is an actual physical box. And in that scenario, I would say it's probably going to be at the transmitter site.
Yeah. Yeah, that would
But
be.
it's flexible enough where you could put it either way or using your second slide there.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, we're looking at station with news operations. You could well have the unit in the newsroom, or it's a web interface, so it could be anywhere. But to trigger a test or do a readout of the alert coming in, a digital rip and read, the unit could be either at the studio or the transmitter.
How does this integrate in a television platform, a television station facility, where you got a lot more data going through it?
Well, right now we're in about 80 to 90% of TV stations in the U.S. And about 50% of, I believe, 50% of TV stations in Canada. We are managing a pretty standard approach where the DASDEC is signaling the text of the alert to the station's media keyer or character generator, and then either directly, well, in the case of a character generator, we do the audio switching with the internal digital switch. In the case of a media keyer, the media keyer usually handles all the audio and audio switch as well as the crawl insertion.
And if the station were running in an ST2110 environment, would that be passable through the devices that you're talking about as 2110?
I'd have to take a look at that, to be honest with you, but that if there's a requirement to do that, we should be able to handle it.
Yeah.
So would you still have, and talking back in the radio, because that's my realm, you got the the AES 67 or Livewire, whichever outputs, you'd still have the traditional either AES 3 or analog outputs on the device as well?
Yes.
Fail safe, yeah.
Yeah, the traditional audio faces are still there. The AES, I'm sorry, the traditional audio faces, the AES 67 interface is networked, and that can be either networked through the station's enterprise, the station's network, the cloud, don't recommend that, or direct interface from the DASDEC to the Nautel and Omnia, Nautel and Telos systems. Now, I'm focusing on Nautel and Telos because they've been great partners, and they're the first out of the gate with this. So we'll see how this evolves in the future, but they've been extraordinarily forward-looking partners.
Well, it looks like this architecture a little bit different than at least what I'm used to, where the box is actually in line and the box does the switching. It's all external switching for this.
Well, in some regards, yeah. The audio switching, we still do our traditional role as an EAS box, produce the audio. But yeah, right now we're in a full IP environment, so the audio, the switching can occur within the virtualized operation.
Would you ever have an AES 67 input on your box that you think?
We are looking at a number of things. So
okay. That would be the only thing I could say that might make this, a little bit easier for some other guys to comprehend, a little more traditional looking at that part.
I to finish up, I am on the regulatory and the policy side. So when it comes to technology, I'm sure some of the engineers listening to this webinar will be pulling their hairs at it, saying, no, we have that already.
So I understand that NAB has a radio tech committee, basically, and they're working on the concept of using AES 67 for an end-to-end workflow. Or are you kind of involved in that with your products in EAS?
No, we are not members of the NAB Radio Technical Committee. We haven't really been in their discussions. They've invited us in once or twice, but there really hasn't been an in-depth dialogue, at least with us, on what they're looking at. They're looking basically, I wouldn't focus on AES 67. The NAB Radio Technical Committee has proposed completely virtualizing the system, i.e. abstracting the EAS software and putting that into the stack as well. we'll see where that goes. We have, we're not opposing that per se. What we're saying is we need to take a careful look at this, because that could open a massive Pandora's box of considerations. One being triggering a rewrite of the FCC rules. And given the FCC's activism on the mobile wireless side, be careful what you ask for. Once you start rewriting things, the government could get very interested in adding a whole lot of things into there that, as a broadcast community, we might not be that interested in doing, including one suggestion I've heard, not from the FCC, but the emergency management community, is making all EAS mandatory, changing the rules to make every single message mandatory, no opt-out like it is today. Be careful what you wish for. Another consideration is IPAWS conformance. There is a conformity process under the rules. We've gone through it. A change in product may not be eligible, may not be valid under IPAWS conformance testing, which again triggers Part 11 conformance. The third issue is cybersecurity. Again, be careful what you wish for, because once we go all software in what is a critical infrastructure environment, broadcasters, you are critical infrastructure. CISA, Cybersecurity Information Systems Security Agency, regulates software in these types of environments, at least software that touches federal systems via IPAWS. So this could trigger a whole series of requirements on that side as well. Essentially rewriting software. The fourth thing, and again, things to consider, to plan out. I mean, we're not throwing a Hail Mary at the FCC and asking them to change things. We're taking a look at it and saying, you know what, the cost to this to the manufacturers could be fairly substantial. If you look at the models for virtualized software, the price does not go down. If you look at every single market study out there, the price to go from appliance-based, which is what we are, we're appliance-based system, to a pure virtual architecture, the price tends to go through the roof, especially on the tail end. You're not talking about buying buying a $2,000, $3,000 EAS box and then worrying about a $500 software update every 3 or 4 years. No, what you're talking about, again, I'm basing this off of other industries, not what we're suggesting that we would do, but you're talking about a higher front end and then an SLA on the back end of some hundreds or thousands of dollars per year this becomes a managed service.
Forever.
Okay. Watch out what you ask for. I mean, we're not, if we have, just for example, if we have customer support costs that are 4x what they are today, and that's what happens to virtualized software, every single study, then those costs have to translate into a different economic model for the manufacturer. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. We understand the broadcaster's concern. At the same time, the EAS manufacturer needs to be a stable company. We're a stable company now. We're doing well. We're investing in the future. Other companies that have not advanced their product line, well, we've seen what just happened. We don't want to really blow up the whole EAS apple cart without some real public-private conversations about what can be done here. So I'm not shooting down the NA proposal, not by any means, but all I'm saying is there's a lot more to it that needs to be discussed on the policy side, the regulatory side, the technical side, and the economic side.
So a software-only product may not be the way to go, is kind of what you're thinking, especially as far as cost from a customer?
Not without some dramatic changes in not without some dramatic changes in terms of regulation, in terms of the value-added perception of EAS on the part of the broadcaster. Let's face it, for a lot of broadcasters, they don't want to deal with EAS at all. It's the dreaded unfunded mandate. Now you're saying this could be something that costs even more or requires more maintenance. And by the way, I haven't even gotten to the joy of having to deal with differing versions of hypervisors, differing versions of hardware platforms. It's not like you're tossing out shrink wrapped Windows software and you can plug it in everywhere. This is national security, public safety software, and it for us, we've designed it with some NIST requirements in mind, and those NIST requirements don't marry well with a virtualized environment unless you're re-engineering the entire system. I can't speak for every other in the entire software architecture within the product. I can't speak for every other manufacturer, but I would expect their viewpoint would be very similar, that the return on investment to do virtual in the current pricing model doesn't work. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work for anyone.
Not only expensive on the software side, but this has to be on good quality hardware also, which is not cheap. And you start doing this and that, and your infrastructure.
Yeah, you're not putting this on a Raspberry Pi or Windows XP and Hail Marrying it
Right.
through. This is going to have to be on a stable platform. There are things we would consider, but it's going to be it would be in a much more controlled environment. It can't be Wild West. We email or send software to parties unknown for hardware platforms unknown. That's unsupportable. That's just unsupportable.
What regulations would have to change?
Well, a lot of Part 11. First of all, much of Part 11 relies on the concept that a Part 11 certified and Part 15 certified device is at the broadcaster's premise. You take that away, and the FCC really doesn't have a certification regime for software. It's based on the RF characteristics of the device. So you go software only, all of a sudden the FCC's regulatory oversight could be eviscerated. Now, I've never seen any regulatory agency in history anywhere willing to give up its ability to control one of its core functions, which is regulating EAS.
You know, one of the things I heard in the industry is that a couple of years ago there was talk about giving up the legacy signaling system, you know, the LP1s, the LP2s, and the PEP, primarily from, aspects of, iPaws was good enough and that kind of thing. What are your feelings on that, and how might something like that affect the broadcaster?
From my perspective, there were a couple of years where it was, gee whiz, the world is all internet and cell phones. And now in a world post-hurricane, now post-wildfire world, we're still in the wildfire world right now. I think several agencies are stepping back at the state and federal level and saying, you know what, the basics, the meat and potato systems are necessary. So what you're talking about, Chet, was, we don't need the daisy chain anymore. We can have things based entirely on cap. That's the way it is in Canada. Entirely on cap, fed over the internet. You can have, and then nobody listens to radio or TV anymore, so we can just put it all onto cell phones, because 99% of people have at least one cell phone. I can give you my own anecdotes of having over a half dozen cell phones in my family, and only 3 or 4 of them get an alert at any given time. So there's a ghost in the machine somewhere. But the idea of internet relay is, based on the fragility of the internet. Yes, the internet's getting more robust, more reliable, but when there are physical infrastructure outages, a wireless relay makes a lot of sense. Now, what's annoying about the wireless relay today is that it's based on FSK tones in band. Well, I wish I had a movie. I wish I had that movie announcer's voice. Imagine a world where, for the movie promos, but imagine a world where we start moving towards out-of-band signaling, where ATSC 1, ATSC 3 stations could carry the CAP message, the IP-based message, out of band. And you could receive that on EAS devices in the field. Not to cut out radio, but maybe HD radio could do modest out-of-band data signaling. All of a sudden, you're doing data broadcast the kind of a way a satellite system would do, but a fraction of the cost. A fraction of the cost with ATSC receivers or HD radio receivers potentially, or maybe other wireless modes as well. The point being that, there needs to be some form of radio or wireless receiver in place. The internet's a great backup, but I think the system needs to move towards a more robust way of wireless signaling. We've actually built a system just like that in Ohio, where the state's public broadcasters are data casting. We're aggregating and we're relaying all the IPAWS cap alerts over the public broadcast stations in Ohio. Some 66 sites across Ohio have what we call an IPAWS emulator, but have a device where they can receive the datacast feed. And their existing units, LP1s, 2s, and 3s, most of them have SAGEs. The SAGEs pull the IPAWS emulator just like it was IPAWS. So if the internet goes out, they're still polling what they think is IPAWS, but it is a secure, policy-oriented server we've provided, and it works. It's been operating 24/7, 365 for a good number of years, 6 or 7 years now. We're not talking 4 or 5 nines. We're talking 6, 7 nines of reliability. It has been operating nonstop. That type of model in ATSC1 is very interesting and viable, especially with public broadcasters and their commitment to public service. If you look at ATSC3, next generation television, it gets even more interesting. Why? ATSC3 is an all IP environment, means no proprietary clients, a non-proprietary nationwide capability to broadcast alerts for just a tiny sliver of bandwidth. Jerry Fritz, who was with Sinclair Broadcasting, retired recently. He wrote a great op-ed that appeared in, I think, TV News Check and TV Technology for a public service trade-off, that the government's commitment to ATSC3 could be well justified for a very modest commitment of bandwidth. And this is a concept that could be, I think, very well worthwhile taking a look at nationwide. By SBE, by others, that to provide a wireless broadcast overlay using ATSC3 spectrum is using existing equipment station already putting in the station, non-proprietary clients. All of a sudden, it becomes a ubiquitous wireless network. I'm not an expert in HD radio, so. You are, but maybe there's a role for HD radio to also be a transmission path for cap-based alerts.
There's no reason why it couldn't. They're doing traffic data now for a sliver bit of data, but
and the point, and there may be a race condition, and that ATSC3 broadcast larger bandwidth, maybe a faster file transfer, but it's not a race. It's something has to get through. And if ATSC3 doesn't work, then HD radio could work.
Combination.
Or a combination. So what's the bottom line here? And Jen, now you and I talked earlier about this, and this will be an unpopular opinion, at least in this forum. But one way to look at the world is that if people are not consuming EAS in the messages, it's because they're not watching TV and radio anymore. So what is the one advantage? What is one of the key advantages of broadcasting radio, TV and radio right now over streaming? The great enemy here, the streaming audio and streaming video services, OTT services, EAS. They don't carry it. They probably won't carry it, at least not in the foreseeable future.
My stations put EAS over the streams.
Well, I'm not talking about station broadcast streams.
No, I got you.
I'll leave the brand names out, but these subscription pay-per-view services that are
Gotcha.
They're not cable systems, although they look a lot like cable systems over the internet. You get your 75 channels. But if you're in a silo listening to Pandora, Spotify, yeah, I said names. If you're looking at if Amazon Prime, etc., you're not getting emergency alerts. And if there's an emergency, where's the first or second place people turn? Broadcast. People mill. It's a social science terminology. People engage in milling behavior. When there is a WEA message, we did a study with Sinclair and Visa, an industry alliance. When people receive a WEA message, they seek to confirm what's really going on. Where do they go? TV and radio. And a surprising number of me went to TV over radio, which was interesting behavior, but that may be just the demographics, the visual demographic. But point being that emergency alerting is content, but in terms of for the program director or the station manager, EAS is content. It's free content being given by the government. It is content that is incredibly relevant and actionable by your audience. Maybe we need to come together and think of new ways to serve that content. We have some ways in ATSC3 you're working with. There may be other ways in HD radio. The FCC may not be thrilled that it goes outside of EAS per se, but maybe that's where we need to start driving things towards presenting this content, value-added content, in ways that are interesting and compelling to the consumer.
So, that's one area that you touched on with the broadcaster offers the advantage of being able to be locally there in the community and provide local news and provide emergency alert information. There's not another platform that's really capable of doing that except a broadcast platform in the local community. What would you say to those stations in that local community, that say they don't want to support EAS, they only want to do the very minimum, and then they would propose not even to do that, and not, if they had their way. I mean, in my view, it's kind of a blind view of their obligations to the community. But why don't you touch on that for a moment?
I'll paraphrase what incoming chairman, and I think we predict Chairman Carr will become, Commissioner Carr will become chairman. He's going to look hard at the public service obligations of the entities they regulate. And he meant it in a slightly different context, but participation in EAS is a very modest requirement compared to the amount of bandwidth the government, which is a public good, the amount of public goods that the broadcasters are getting at minimum no charge. Yes, there are lots of other things that the FCC could address to reduce paperwork and filings. My God, I just saw a legal brief from Dave Oxenford with the upcoming regulatory and filings calendar for 2025. Stunning. I mean, it's a spreadsheet of stuff. That, I would say, is an area that the FCC should rein in. But for EAS, it's in the public's interest. It's in the government's interest, the guys who give you the spectrum. And now I'm pitching, this is in your interest as a business entity to recapture market share, recapture eardrums and eyeballs, and drive them back, compel them back to your platforms over streaming, including in the car. I mean, I'll hold this thing up. This thing is attached to my dashboard console with my kids every time I'm in the car. I would love to hear my local news station, but instead I'm listening to K-pop or God knows what over streaming, and that's a challenge. Content.
And another way that broadcast stations service the community, there's been this proposal out by the FCC for some time, about 10 years or more. It's called, it's known in the FCC Media Bureau docket as 12-107. It's accessibility to emergency information and apparatus equipment for emergency instruction for video description implementations. Are you familiar with that? And
what you're talking about is the 21st Century Act. I forget the full name, but the 21 CBAA, which is the Accessibility Act, which triggered a group of rulemakings from the FCC. One touching broadcast initially was that any emergency information, they created a whole new category, emergency information, any emergency information you describe on TV, talk about, or view, actually, I got that exactly backwards. Any emergency information that you display on TV must also be available in audio format. So if you've got a crawl of urgent information going on about an emergency, that's not EAS. EAS already has the audio and the text, the video in it. But if you're just showing the text of a local emergency, not school closing, but any other traffic advisor, et cetera, you're supposed to put some tones in the main audio to signal people that the audio version of this alert is available, and what they in the secondary audio channel, or they refer to as SAP channel in the rules. So that part, still haven't seen any studies on whether that's had a chilling effect on the display of emergency information. I know up in Maryland, one of the public broadcasters thought they were going to do the right thing. This was several years ago, and they displayed the text of emergency. They didn't have time to announce it. They just scrolled the text of the local emergency in this was right outside the DC area. Well, the FCC hit them with a fine, because it was not compliant with CBNE, the FCC rules, to have the audio, the text-to-speech or the live speech in the secondary audio, because there was no text, there was no audio description on the main channel. That's the current rule. The NAB, and I fully agree with the NAB on this one, the NAB has petitioned the FCC to further delay the second part of the ruling, which would be any graphical element that you display on television also needs to be described orally. So if you've got a photo or a map, a weather map, imagine a Doppler, trying to do an oral description of what is going on in the emergency visual display. Well, the rule says you have to do that, and that date is coming up imminently for compliance.
Yes, SBE has been working with NAB on this, and
Right.
we filed for a delay in that implementation. It was supposed to happen on November 27th of this past year, and in December we got SBE got granted a delay in that, and I don't know how you call it, but they waived anybody that wasn't in compliance after November 27th until May of this next year. But I think the time's coming to an end on that, and the question is you mentioned weather radar and a tornado situation at a station at 2 a.m. in the morning. What's the practical, method that the station's going to use to describe an orange dot moving across a radar screen for the SAP channel in order to be compliant so that they don't face fines?
Right. Well, if you've got a news broadcast going on, that's exempt, because you are talking about what's going on. If you have a breaking news pop up and with a tornado map, and there's no oral description of what's going on in that map, and no oral description in the secondary audio as well, you'll have a problem as of May. Now, should the FCC punt it again? I would still say yes, but it would be extraordinary for the FCC in its traditional rulemaking method or modus. They don't punt. They don't extend things that many times. People will start bringing up AI is here. Why can't we do anything like with AI to automatically generate descriptions, as if AI has eyeballs that can see what's going on the screen? Why we've had years to develop this? Why haven't we? To me, it's a two-way street. What is sufficient to describe complex graphics that are being displayed? If you look at the accessibility elements in WC3, the Internet Guidance, you put a picture, and the accessibility descriptor is picture with man with hat. That's all it says. It's not a deep. So would you just say we're showing a weather radar of Montgomery County, Maryland? Is that auto-generated, or would it be automatically a weather map is being shown? Is that sufficient? Not exactly informative for the listening public who are listening, but that's, what are the requirements? That's my bottom line question. What are the actual technical requirements that the government, the accessibility community would like to see? Because we could build all sorts of stuff as an industry that may not comport with the rules.
So as I understand it, the requirements as they exist right now is that you must accurately describe what's going on the screen. So if that's a weather radar with a dot moving across the screen, you got to say there's a dot moving across the screen. And my point is that 2 a.m. in the morning, when you might have one person at the station in master control, there's no staff there to do that. So NAB and SBE working together. NAB is primarily doing this, is taking the lead on this, is to change that rule to where a crawl would be sufficient, and a text to speech conversion of that crawl would be sufficient in the SAP channel. And I think most stations could implement that, but still might be kind of tough,
Well,
and then suppose the alert comes in via EAS. How would that be handled?
Okay, so we've got a lot of challenges here, because if an EAS message comes at the same time, you're pointing people to the SAP channel. You've got a race condition to listen to things at the same time. They don't override each other. You just have one audio stream in the SAP channel, one is EAS. Now we have systems that are designed for CVA compliance. There's EAS, which is one thing, and then there is we have a system called AMS. I'm not advertising, but describing how one company's done it, where the textual output of the emergency information crawl from any third-party system can be extorted to our AMS. We insert the three beeps into the main audio, and then create the text-to-speech for the SAP channel insertion. That's the AMS product role. If the NAB's proposal takes hold, then really what this boils down to is making sure that the broadcaster has text in the crawl that adequately covers what's being graphically displayed. So let's say there is a blue alert, the infamous blue alert, and you're not going to carry it as an EAS message. You decide to carry it as a news pop-up, a news flash, and you've got a picture of the guy. Well, in the text, you should simply then say, the description of the subject follows: 5'7", yada yada yada. I just picked a short guy, apparently, and then you're covered. And in that sense, the NAB, the SB proposal is right on the mark. You've got the information described in the text and picked it over the air. If it's 2 in the morning, you're probably not going to do a lot of video pop-ups. There's not going to be anybody there in the newsroom to do that type of automated generation, automated newsroom generation. If it's in the late hours, could be, but the odds are that if you're generating that kind of content, you're also being provided the textual description of what's going on in that. The weather, if you take a weather map from whatever source, AccuWeather, Weather Company, or National Weather Service, if you pop up Doppler radar, odds are you can get some basic descriptive text of storm front moving north-northwest through Montgomery County. I don't know why I'm picking on Montgomery County today, but that kind of text should be readily available or input in conjunction with the graphics you're showing. The hard one may be a traffic map. But then again, if you're using this as traffic, there's a major accident on I-95 near Lorton. And this happens every day if you live in my area in Virginia. Then you would be displaying a traffic map with Lorton with the dot over where the accidents happen, but your text is just described where it is. So I see this. This is a long way of saying I see this problem as eminently solvable through common sense, but it's not describing the graphic. It's making sure that the text that's included adequately captures what's being displayed as well, and then that text, just as you're proposing, can be rendered in text to speech.
And I think the rules as they're written right now don't allow some of that common sense to take place at the broadcast level. We're trying to put those back in, so to speak. If you read part 79, where this call comes up, it does go down quite low in level what they consider an emergency. It goes down to a power failure, for example, but they don't classify what a power failure is. And so if you're talking about power failure in one city block, or that you want to read on there or put a crawl up, are you going to interrupt your SAP channel for that? And take my situation here in Miami. you know, the majority of our community, or vast majority of our community, is Spanish. So they speak Spanish. They might want to listen to Spanish on the SAP channel. So now we're interrupting the SAP channel, which might have as large of an audience as the English channel, to give a warning in English to a very small percentage of the viewership who are visually impaired, that may not be watching TV in the first place and probably don't get most of their critical information from the television medium just because of the nature of their handicap.
Well, we had that debate internally as well, right off the bat, and which is why we put Spanish language support, text to speech in the AMS. But still, that would require the source to render the Spanish version of the text. Now you've got an awful long message that's in your SAP channel, English, Spanish, then English, or vice versa. It's not a perfect solution. So then we go. Let's jump forward. Then I think NAB and SBE are on the right track in encouraging the encouraging the FCC to step back and refine its rules on that matter to make it reasonable and actually doable. But for the future, we're looking in ATSC 3, and I'll jump to the next gen TV. We've developed a service, ATSC, within a standard called Advanced Emergency Information. And that provides the television broadcast with the ability to transmit any manner of urgent information, not just EAS, any emergency information, urgent information for the community as an app-based service. So you can get a little icon pop up that there's a tsunami. Well, that's a bad idea. For tsunami, that'd be EAS. But there's a fire in your area. You get the fire icon, and working with FEMA and other groups to standardize icons. You get an icon. Click here for more information. Click. Get the pop up. Dive deeper if you need to with maps, multiple language translations, text to speech, everything that is a challenge for traditional, quote unquote, traditional TV with the SAP channel can be much better handled with next gen TV and advanced emergency information. And outside of the FCC's regulatory framework, at least for the time being. So the ability to do, especially with the next gen TV, you're making your television to basically a massive smartphone for all intents and purposes, with apps like advanced emergency information, where you can seek through and get a whole range of different alerts and information. So instead of doing EAS, just for example, how many stations would blast a blue alert, or want to do an amber alert, or I know a lot of stations do see that as obligation, but as you noted, a lot of stations would object to all these different EAS messages, especially severe thunderstorm warnings, which are every 5 minutes, Miami. What if that kind of content was served as advanced emergency information with different priority rules? So you can have an icon in the corner. Users can opt in or out. If I don't have kids, I don't want kids, I don't like kids, I'm opting out of Amber Alerts or school closing information. If I could opt into getting traffic information over this service. So that's advanced emergency information, which I think handles a lot of the CVAA question. It is an optional service in ATSC 3, but I think it's a powerful one. Another thing that we're trying to do, and we showed this at NAB with TELUS and Autel as well, is introducing alert symbology. I think we have a graphic on this as well. Introducing symbology into the radio environment, broadcast radio environment, where if there's an emergency alert, we can put on in the graphic system, deliver a symbol for the alert, which can be persistent. So you may have an EAS crawl for a severe storm warning, or more likely, major event like an Amber Alert. Well, that alert will play and then go off, but your HD radio could carry that icon for the duration of the emergency. Not for every emergency, but for certain things, maybe you want to have people aware that there's a tornado warning in your area with that tornado logo off. And when the warning stops, that logo disappears. And we did that at NAB already, and we're hoping industry begins to adopt things like this. But again, when you're talking about accessibility, when you're talking about CVA compliance, our thought is that there are a lot of different ways to handle these without burdensome rules like adding 13 language to EAS. If your station's got 99% English speaking audience, that 1% I think can be addressed by getting an icon up there, getting some symbology that can be universally understood, and then milling. I see it's a tornado. I'm going to flip to a source in my language that can give me more information about that.
Now, maybe a better way to handle the visually impaired issue with next gen television or ATSC3 would be to have a profile of the user in the setup of the set itself and describe the user as visually impaired, and then that way information that you're talking about that's going to be sent digitally to the viewer and allow the viewer to opt in or out would also be translated orally to the viewer as well as visually, and interrupt the audio to just that particular viewer. That way,
Yes.
You would have a need for what we're describing here as DA, the visually impaired rule that we discussed earlier in the broadcast.
Right. ATSC3 has many of those capabilities: closed captioning, multiple audio tracks with different languages. All these capabilities exist within the standard. All these capabilities being made available by the manufacturing community. It's there. It's just a matter of time as these services get rolled out into the marketplace.
Well, Ed, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been a very informative discussion about EAS and where we're going and some of the rules that are changing that are coming up that are going to affect broadcasters. And, I'm glad to see that you're on top of a lot of it. There were a number of issues that we discussed here. I still have quite a list of stuff that we could discuss in the future. So maybe you can join us again in a couple months for another discussion on EAS matters.
So you're already scheduling a future Webxtra. Got it. I'll make a note of that.
Well, that's not me. I can find somebody who can speak the technical talk a little bit more.
It's a good conversation, though. Really, there's a lot of stuff everybody needs to think about.
I think the opportunity is there for the broadcast community to get together and begin designing itself what the next generation of public alert warning can be. It shouldn't just be a governmental function. It really is a public-private partnership. So the opportunity is now for us as a group, as a community, to make recommendations to develop systems for the next generation of EAS, and not necessarily wait around for rules and guidance to be foisted upon industry. We should take the lead.
That's one of the roles we do here at SBE, and through the GRC, we want to support your work, NAB's work, and gear the industry towards something that is very usable to the public and truly a community public service, and support the FCC in those ends, along with the rest of the industry. So that's part of the reason why the GRC exists within the SBE, as well as the educational benefits of SBE to engineers. So I guess with that said, we wrap it up.
Very good. Well, again, Ed, thanks for joining us today. And Brad and Ched, good to talk to you as well. Thanks for being on today's SBE Webxtra. And thanks for watching the SBE Webxtra, the SBE chapter of the web from the Society of Broadcast Engineers, the Association for Broadcast and Multimedia Technology Professionals. Thanks again, Ed, Brad, and Ched, for being with us today. If you hold SBE certification, viewing the SBE Webxtra qualifies you for 1/2 point in category G. That's attendance. It's just like attending a local chapter meeting. If you have an idea for a topic or a guest for the SBE Webxtra, send it to webextra@sbe.org. Thanks again for watching. I'm Chris Scherer, SBE Member Communications Director. We'll see you next month.